Hello, hello everyone. Yeah, myself Lavanya Anjali Mitrana, Head Department of Science State College for Women. Today we are going to learn the fourth unit under semester 5, that is urban local governance. So today we are going to deal with governance. What is good? What is governance? What do you mean by governance? What is good governance? What are the challenges to good governance? Characteristics of good governance? And then we are going to deal with the municipal administration or the urban local governance. So let us begin with the governance. So governance is the process of decision making and the process by which decisions are implemented or not implemented. Governance can be used in several contexts such as corporate governance, international governance, national governance, and local governance. In the 1992 report entitled Governance and Development, in the 1992 report entitled Governance and Development, the World Bank set out its definition of good governance. It defined good governance as the manner in which public and social resources for development. Good governance has 8 major characteristics. It is participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective, and efficient, equitable, and inclusive, and follows the rule of law. It ensures that the corruption is minimized, the views of minorities are taken into account, and that the voices of the most vulnerable in society are heard in decision making. It is also responsive to the present and future needs of society. Now we'll see what are the principles of good governance given by United Nations. The principles of good governance given by United Nations are participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, follows the rule of law. Participation. People should be able to voice their own opinions through legitimate immediate organizations or representatives. This includes men and women, vulnerable sections of society, backward classes, minorities, etc. Participation also implies freedom of association and expression. Next comes the next characteristics of a good governance is the rule of law. Legal framework should be enforced impartially, especially in human rights laws. Without rule of law, politics will follow the principle of Matsanyaya, that is law of fish, which means the strong will prevail over the weak. And the next characteristic is the consensus-oriented. Consensus-oriented decision-making ensures that even if everyone does not achieve what they want to, the fullest, a common minimum can be achieved by everyone, which will not be detrimental to anyone. It mediates differing interests to meet the broad consensus on the best interest of the community. Equity and inclusiveness. The next principle of good governance is equity and inclusiveness. Good governance assures an equitable society. People should have opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being. And next comes the effectiveness and efficiency. Process and institutions should be able to produce results that meet the needs of their community. Resources of the community should be used effectively for the maximum output. The next principle is the accountability. Good governance aims towards betterment of people, and this cannot take place without the government being accountable to the people. Governmental institutions, private sectors, and civil society organizations should be held accountable to the public and institutional stakeholders. Next comes the transparency. Information should be accessible to the public and should be understandable and monitored. It means free media and access of information to them. Next, the principle of good governance is the responsiveness. Institutions and processes should serve all stakeholders in a reasonable period of time. Now, these are the 8 principles of good governance given by United Nations. And the references of good governance in Indian administration or Indian scenario, there are the Bhagavad Gita, which provides numerous cues for good governance, leadership, dutifulness, and self-realization, which are interpreted in the modern context. And in Kautilya's Arthashastra, around second, third century BC, the welfare of people was considered paramount in the role of king. Mahatma Gandhi emphasized Suraj, which essentially means good governance. Importance of good governance is clearly inscribed in Indian Constitution, which is built on premise of sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic, committing itself to democracy, rule of law, and welfare of people. Under Sustainable Developmental Goals, Goal 16 can be considered to be directly linked as it is dedicated to improvement in governance, inclusion, participation, rights, and security. According to former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, good governance is ensuring respect for human rights and the rule of law, strengthening democracy, promoting transparency and capacity in public administration. He also said that good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting good development. Now we'll see what are the initiatives of good governance in India. The initiatives of good governance in India can be the right to information. RTI Act 2005 makes a significant shift in Indian democracy. It gives greater access of citizens to the information, which in turn improves the responsiveness of the government to community needs. The right to information promotes openness, transparency, and accountability in administration by making the government more open to public security. Then comes the e-governance. E-governance effectively delivers better programming and services in the area of newly emerging information and communication technologies, which herald new opportunities for rapid social and economic transformation worldwide. E-governance has direct impact on citizens, which derive benefits through direct transactions with the services offered by the government. Programs offered under e-governance are proactive governance and timely implementation, that is Pragati, Digital India Program, MCA 21 to improve speed and certainty in the delivery of the services of Ministry of Company Affairs, Passport Seva Kendra, online income tax return, etc. And its main intention is to focus on minimum government, maximum governance. And the other are legal reforms. The central government has scrapped nearly 1,500 obsolete rules and laws with a aim to bring about transparency and improve efficiency, reform criminal justice and procedural laws with focus on pre-institution mediation. Ease of doing business. Steps were taken by the government to improve business conditions, including legislation meant to improve the country's business environment and policy ecosystems such as bankruptcy code, the goods and services tax or GST, and the anti-money laundering law. Government has launched the Make in India initiative. Next, the decentralization. The Centralized Planning Commission was abolished, replacing with the think tank called the National Institution for Transforming India, NITI Aayog, which would usher in an area of cooperative federalism. 14th Finance Commission increased the tax devolution of the divisible pool to states from 30% to 40% for years 2015 to 2020. It provides more freedom to states to initiate schemes based on local factors. Next comes the police reforms, modernizing police forces and implementing the Model Police Act of 2015. Aspirational Districts Program. The Aspirational District Program was launched in January 2018 to transform the lives of the people in underdeveloped areas of the country in a time-bound manner. Then Good Governance Index. The Good Governance Index was launched on the occasion of Good Governance Day on 25th December 2019. The Good Governance Index is a uniform tool across states to assess the status of governance and the impact of various interventions taken up by the state government and union territories. The objectives of Good Governance Index are to provide quantifiable data to compare the state of governance in all states and the union territories, enable states and union territories to formulate and implement suitable strategies for improving governance and shift to result-oriented approaches and administration. Now, next comes the challenges of good governance. Now we'll see what are the challenges faced by the good governance. First one is the criminalization of politics. According to Association of Democratic Reforms, 43% of members of Parliament of Lok Sabha 2019 are facing criminal charges It is a 26% increase as compared to 2014. The criminalization of the political process and the unholy nexus between the politicians, civil servants, and business houses are having a painful influence on public policy formulation and governance. The political class as such is losing respect. Therefore, it is necessary to amend Section 8 of the Representation of the People's Act 1951 to disqualify a person against whom the criminal charges that relate to grave and heinous offences and corruptions are pending. The next challenges of good governance is the corruption. Corruption is a major obstacle in improving the quality of governance. While human greed is obviously a driver of corruption, it is a structural incentives and poor enforcement system to punish the corrupt that have contributed to the rising curve of graft in India. According to the Corruption Perception Index 2019, International Indian ranking has slipped from 78 to 80. Next challenge to good governance is the gender disparity. According to Swami Vivekananda, it's impossible to think about the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved. It is impossible for a bird to fly on only one wing. One way to assess the state of the nation is to study the status of its women. As women comprise almost 50% of the population, it's unfair that they are not adequately represented in government institutions and other allied sectors. Therefore, in order to ensure good governance, it is essential to ensure the empowerment of women. Then growing incidents of violence. Resorting to illegal force is considered to be a law and order problem. But when looks at from the point of view of the principles of good governance, it becomes clear that peace and order is the first step to development. And next challenge to good governance is the delay in justice. A citizen has the right to avail timely justice, but there are several factors because of that a common man does not get timely justice. Next challenge for good governance is the centralization of administrative system. Government at lower levels can only function efficiently if they are empowered to do so. This is particularly relevant for the Panchayati Raj institutions, which currently suffer from inadequate devolution of funds as well as functionaries to carry out the functions constitutionally assigned to them. The next challenge to good governance is the marginalization of socially and economically backward people. The socially and economically backward benefits of the society, sections of the society have always been marginalized in the process of development. Although there are constitutional provisions for their upliftment, but in practice, they are lagging behind in so many areas like education, economic well-being, etc. Finally, under the conclusion of good governance, the effective functioning of governance is a prime concern of every citizen of the country. The citizens are ready to pay the price for good services offered by the state, but what is required is transparent, accountable, intelligible governance system, absolutely free from bias and prejudices. There is a need to reformulate our national strategy to accord primacy to the Gandhian principle of Antyodaya to restore good governance in the country. India should also focus more ethical. The government should continue to work on the ideal Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas, which will lead to inclusive, sustainable development. That was about the good governance. Now we'll move on to the urban governance. Now, as a topic, our paper deals with the urban governance or the role of governance. Now we'll see what are the meaning and definitions of urban governance, characteristics of good urban governance, why urban governance matters, models of urban governance, challenges of good urban governance, achieving good urban governance, and reforms in the urban governance and good urban governance in Telangana. We shall see first what is urban governance. Urban governance refers to how government, local, regional, national, and the stakeholders decide how to plan, finance, and manage urban areas. It involves negotiation, and content stage sources and political power. Education and operation of political institutions, the extent to which these decisions recognize and respond to the interests of the poor. It encompasses a host of economic and social factors, institution relationships. These include labor markets, goods and services, household, kin and social relationships, and basic infrastructure, land, services, and public safety. Large gaps often exist between the poor and better off urban residents in terms of access to social, economic, and political opportunities, and the ability to participate in and leverage the benefits associated with urban living. Urban governances, it plays a critical role in shaping the physical and social character of the urban regions. It influences the quantity and quality of local services and the efficiency of delivery, determines the sharing of cost and distribution of resources among different groups, and affects residents' ability to access local government and engage in decision making, influencing local government and accountability and responsiveness to citizens. Urban governance involves a range of factors and institutions. The relationships among them determine what happens in the society. In managing urban transformations, government at all levels need to play a strategic role in forging partnerships with and among key. While city government is the largest and most visible urban governance actor, much of what affects in the life chances of urban poor lies outside the control of city administration. Instead, it is the market and private businesses, agencies of the central state, or the collective voluntary action of civil society that determine the daily experiences of urban dwellers. Now, let us look into the characteristics of good urban governance. The first characteristics of good urban governance is the participation. Decision-making processes are participatory and inclusive, taking the concerns of the most vulnerable in society into consideration. Therefore, there is a freedom of expression and association and an organized civil society. Next, characteristics of urban good governance is rule of law. Legal frameworks are fair and enforced impartiality. Human rights, particularly those of minorities, are fully protected. Next, transparency. Decision making and enforcement follows rules and regulations. Information is freely available and directly accessible to those affected by decisions and their enforcement. Next characteristics of good governance are responsiveness. Institutions and processes serve all stakeholders within a reasonable time frame. The next characteristic is the consensus oriented. Different interests are mediated to reach a broad consensus on what is in the best interest of the whole community and how this can be achieved. There is a broad and long-term perspective on a sustainable human development stemming from understanding of the historical and cultural and social context of society or community. Next is the equity and inclusiveness. All the members of society, particularly the most vulnerable, have a stake and are not excluded from the mainstream of society. Effectiveness and efficiency. Process and institutions produce results that meet the needs of the society while making the best use of resources at their disposal. Accountability. Governmental institutions as well as the private sector and civil society organizations are accountable to the public and to their institutional stakeholders. Now we'll see why does urban governance matter? What is the need for the urban governance, or what is the importance of urban governance? Managing cities and urban growth is one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. If managed well, cities can act as engines of growth and provide inhabitants with better job opportunities and improved healthcare, housing, safety, and social development. Further, cities can contribute to national growth through increased revenue generation and political stability, as well as playing role in post-conflict reconciliation. Conversely, cities that are poorly planned, managed, and governed can become centers of poverty, inequality, and conflict. The challenge is most acute in the poorest and most fragile states, especially those of sub-Saharan African and South Asia. Expanding urban populations are straining already overburdened and ill-equipped local government planning mechanisms, infrastructure, and urban finance. In many areas, the population has increased faster than the capacity of planners to provide houses and infrastructure and of local business to provide jobs. This has to led the emergence of large informal settlements, crime, and expanded informal economy and increased social tensions. The well-being of the urban poor can be improved by facilitating access to economic opportunities, supportive social networks, greater access to land, infrastructure, and services. Whether and how these are available to the poor depends on a significant extent on urban governance. That is local political process, the influence of civil society organizations representing the poor, and the capacity of the city government to respond. Outcomes depend on a number of factors, including the nature of local democratic institutions and processes, the resources available, and the availability of the poor to organize and articulate demands. Ineffective urban governance affects the poor disproportionately. In particular, oppressive regulation of informal enterprises and settlements can negatively impact upon livelihood opportunities. The design of city-level political system, including democratic structures with checks and balances between executive and legislature and periodic elections, must be supplemented by broader participation to ensure that decisions reflect the needs of the poor. Maximizing the potential of urban areas requires institutionalization mechanism of coordination, planning, and accountability among diverse stakeholders. However, many city governments face severe capacity constraints, lack the vision to address urban growth, they need better information or data on poverty, the environment, and resources. Three key messages emerge the underlying why urban governance matters. The scale and high population density of cities enable economic and social interaction to occur more frequently and effectively. This creates potential for cities to productive and to offer inhabitants a better quality of life. To unlock this potential, key issues surrounding land, transport, public finance, and regulation need to be addressed. Making the city work requires investment in residential, commercial, and industrial structures supported by a combination of effective land markets, appropriate regulation, good public services, adequate public finance, and transparent, accountable city-level political systems. Next, harnessing urbanization requires smart policy and hard work, that is, effective urban governance and the implications of failure or long term. Now, let us see what are the challenges of urban governance. Meeting the needs of India's soaring urban populations is and will therefore continue to be a strategic policy matter. Critical issues that to be addressed are poor local governance, weak finances, inappropriate planning that leads to high costs of housing and office space. In some Indian cities, these costs are among the highest in the world. Critical infrastructure and shortages and major service deficiencies that include erratic water and power supply and woefully inadequate transportation systems, rapidly deteriorating environment. Now we'll see what are the exact challenges. The first comes the planning. Many urban governments lack a modern planning framework. The multiplicity of local bodies obstructs efficient planning and land use. Rigid master plans and restrictive zoning regulations limit the land available for building, constructing cities, abilities to grow in accordance with changing needs. Then comes the housing. Building regulations that limit urban density such as floor space indexes reduce the number of houses available, thereby pushing up property prices. Outdated recent control regulations reduce the number of houses available and rent a critical option for the poor. Poor access to microfinance and mortgage finance limit the ability of low-income groups to buy or improve their homes. Policy planning and regulation deficiencies leads to proliferations of slums. Weak finances of urban local bodies and service providers leave them unable to expand the trunk infrastructure that housing developers need to develop new sites. Next comes the service delivery. Most services are delivered by city governments with unclear lines of accountability. There's a strong bias towards adding physical infrastructure rather than providing financially and environmentally sustainable services. Service providers are unable to recover operations and maintenance costs and depend on the governments for finance. Independent regulatory authorities that set tariffs, decides on subsidies, and enforce service quality are generally absent. Next comes the infrastructure challenge. Most urban bodies do not generate the revenues needed to lease infrastructure, nor do they have the creditworthiness to access capital markets for funds. Urban transport planning needs to be more realistic. There is a focus on moving vehicles rather than meeting the needs of the large numbers of people who walk or ride bicycles in India towards towns and cities. Environment. The last challenge for the urban governance of the deteriorating urban environment is taking diminishing their quality of life. The World Bank, the World Bank will look to support policy information, policy reform in critical areas such as land use planning and municipal finance as well as institutional reform. It will work with all the three tiers of government in designing programs to address slums, housing, and urban infrastructure requirements. Finally, what are the things that to be done in for achieving good urban governance? Several key issues of good urban governance stand out in the Indian context. These are decentralization, integration of the poor and marginalized, environmental sustainability, mobilization of municipal finance, transparency and civic engagement, better municipal management, and capacity building. Now we'll see what are the reforms in urban governance. The task force constituted by the C&AG of India had recommended for the introduction of accrual basis for accounting system for the urban local bodies. ULB suggested model budgeting accounting formats for that purpose. The task force report was circulated to all states and union territories for adoption of accrual basis of accounting system as well as the budget accounting formats. Further, to provide a simplified toolkit to the ULBs for recording the accounting entries, provide a simplified tool to the ULBs for recording the accounting entries. Ministry of Urban Development, in cooperation with the Office of C&AG of India, has prepared a National Municipal Accounting Manual (NMAM) circulated to all cities and UTs in January 2005. The manual comprehensively details the accounting policies, procedures, guidelines designed to ensure correct, complete, timely recording of municipal transactions, produce accurate, relevant financial reports. The NMAM will help the states prepare the state level accounting manuals in accordance with their own requirements for use by the urban local bodies. The initiative is expected not only to enhance the capacities of ULBs in accounting, leading to increased transparency, accountability of utilization of public funds for the development of urban sector, but also will help in creating an environment which urban local bodies can play their role more effectively and ensure better service delivery. Then service level, the next reforms in the urban local bodies is the service level benchmarks. Ministry of Urban Development has laid down service level benchmarks for urban services like water supply, sanitation, urban transport, working towards achieving these benchmarks would bring about a paradigm shift in working of the urban local bodies to provide worthless urban services. Public-private participation guidelines. The next reforms under good urban local governance is the public-private participation guidelines. Central government will develop guidelines for involvement of the private sector infrastructure, which will ensure competitive bidding process in a transparent manner. These guidelines will not only protect the consumers but also ensure integrity of the process. This would support municipalities in designing the public-private partnership process on the lines of BOT Center in Philippines or the PPP in the Ministry of Finance in South Africa. Then push to reform through Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission (JNNURM). When the 7-year JNNURM was launched in December 2005, the release of additional central assistance FCE under the mission was made conditional to the states and the local bodies carrying out urban reforms. The reforms include implementation of the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment for Decentralization, repeal of Urban Land Ceilings Regulation Act, reform in rent control laws, rationalization of stamp duty, enactment of public disclosure law, enactment of community participation law, assigning or associating urban local bodies in planning function, accrual-based double-entry system of accounting, e-governance, property tax calibration with global information system, recovery of user charge, internal marking of budget for basic service to urban board, provision of basic services to the urban board, a revision of bylaws for streamlining approval process of building construction, simplification of law for change in use, introduction property title certification, marking developed or housing for the economically weaker sections, computerization of registration of property, revision of bylaws for rainwater harvesting, water conservation, bylaws for recycled water, administrative reforms like reduction in establishment costs, structural reforms, encouraging public-private partnership, etc. So this is all about the urban governance. Hope you're clear with the urban governance. The next we'll move on to the local governance. What do you mean by local governance, or what is local governance, and what are the evolution of local governance? How local governance has evolved in India? It has been evolved. We have the local governance or the governance since ancient times, but after the during the under the imperial regime, how the various layers have been brought forward by the British government to lay the steps for the urban governance or the local government in India throughout the medieval period. So now we are going to deal with the evolution of urban local government in India. We'll see what is the historical background of the urban local government in India. Throughout the primeval period in India, we have substantiation that industrial civilization with highly sophisticated and well-structured urban culture. And next, considering the patterns of laying down the infrastructure and their maintenance, one can safely assume that for this city, there must have been a sufficiently efficient municipal management. And next, under the Mughal period, when it comes to the medieval ages, the Mughal period, during the Mughal era, responsibility of administering a city was entrusted on Kotwal, Abul Fazl, Ingizane Akbari, serialized as many as 8 functions of Kotwal, that is the commissionerate or the city commissioner. They are to detect thieves, to regulate prices and check weights and measures, to keep a watch at night and patrol the city, to keep up registers of houses and watch the movement of strangers, etc., to employ spies for among the vagabonds, to prepare an inventory of and take charge of the property of deceased or missing persons who left no heirs, to prevent the slaughter of oxen, buffaloes, horses, or camels, and to prevent burning of women against their will and circumcision below the age of 12. The main business of this Kotwal is to preserve peace and public security in urban areas. However, no definite records are available to have an idea as to how Kotwal managed these affairs. The pattern of office he was allowed to maintain and the assistance he received. In fact, the type of urban administration that ran under the Mughal had neither any public backing nor any legal status. It was an administration imposed from above and not in the true sense of the term a local administration run by local representatives. During the later part of Mughal rule, the urban administration had collapsed. In the words of Majumdar et al., during the turmoil that followed in the wake of dissolution of the Mughal Empire, these self-governing organizations almost entirely disappeared from towns and greatly decaying villages. Now, under the British regime or under the imperial administration, how the path for the urban local government was laid. So there were a series of acts and laws were taken under the British government between 1666 1688 and 1882. To begin with, British were never interested in revitalizing the urban administration in India. However, in the 1688, they were the first time introduced municipal corporation in the city of Madras by a charter granted in 1687. While modeling this institution, the practice prevailing in Great Britain at the time was followed. The dominant rationale for consulting the municipality was to collect taxes and also to accommodate the political aspirations of the increasing group of well-informed and well-read Indians. The municipal corporation was set up because the East India Company believed that people would willingly pay 5 shillings for public good, being taxed by themselves, than 6 pence raised by our despotic power. The other reasons were to shift civil and sanitation functions to the local level institutions, to prevent epidemic and to ascertain supply of essential services like water supply, drainage, etc., and fiscal compulsory. Local government institutions were nonetheless not given genuine power, resources, and authority. The municipalities were given very few functions. Financial resources are thoroughly inadequate. There was too much official monitoring exercised by the district collector. In 1726, the municipal corporation was converted into a mayor's court, empowering it with the judicial powers, and thus it became a judicial body than an administrative entity. It was only in 1793 the municipal administration in India was given the statutory rank when the Charter Act 1793 was passed. Under this rank, 3 municipal bodies were established in the presidency towns of Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay with extensive taxation powers. At first, Indians were fascinated by the municipal governments, but with the subsequent escalation of the national struggle for self-determination, public they weaned away from local government. Progressively, the Indian leaders boycotted the local governing institutions and attention was exclusively focused on the nation's freedom movement. Nonetheless, municipal government owes its origin to the colonial government's advantage in setting up municipal institutions in towns and cities. Hence, the actual commencement of the urban local bodies owes their derivation to the British rule. The initiation was Samuel Lyon, the member of the Viceroy's Council in the budget speech, advocating that local services should be supported on local resources. Lord Mayor's resolution of 1870 pioneered the concept of elected representatives in the municipalities. The resolution expected that its full operation would lead to the thriving of municipal government in India, but an assessment of the Taxation Inquiry Commission 1953 to 54 reveals the resolution of Lord Mayor on financial affecting economy by decentralized administration. This was functional for both rural and urban local governments. Mayor's resolution was not given effect in all the towns equally, and as a result, there was no standardized definite principles of administering and managing the towns. In case of particular municipalities, the authority of taxation for tackling local requirements was based on legislative enactments, while in other cases it was dependent on local usages and reforms. In certain other cases, government has full control over the administration. The various resolutions, laws for the urban governance under the British rule was the Ripon Resolution, which endeavored to remove defects that prevailed in the municipal administration of his times. And then next comes the Royal Commission and Decentralization was set up, which made public its report 1908. And the Government of India Act 1919 and 1935, the conclusion of World War I was a certain curtain raiser to fight for the freedom of India. So there was a repressive demand for Indian constitutional reforms, small elemental reforms not convince the people of India, and that is that it is sustain consent this. So during Mr. Edwin Montague, the Secretary of State for India, made an announcement in the House of Commons that the policy of His Majesty's government, this Government of India, in complete accord is that increasing associations of Indians in every branch of administration and the gradual development of self-governing institutions with a view to the progressive realization of responsible government in India. And next comes the independence and after independence. And after the independence, so several acts have been taken for the urban local governance in India by the British, and we'll see what are the changes or the measures taken for the urban governance in India, that is after independence. After independence, the Constitution of India was structured and federal guidelines. Indian Constitution has split government functions in three lists, that is central, state, and concurrent lists. Local bodies are sheltered in the state list and governed by state statutes or in the union territories by the Union Parliament. The Constitution of India, which came into force in 1950, has made meticulous provisions for making certain democratic operation of the Parliament and the state legislatures. But apart from a circumulatory reference to the municipalities, an item 5 of the state list of subjects of the concurrent laws on for the enactment of laws on urban administration, there was no reference in the Constitution of India about the urban local bodies. Thus, the Constitution did not make urban local governance an exact constitutional obligation. While the directive principles of state also refer to village panchayats, there is no explicit reference to the urban local bodies. As an outcome, owing to states' constitutional provisions for urban local governance, democracy at this level has not been unwavering. Though the respective municipal acts of states provide for recurring elections to municipal bodies at regular intervals, they were commonly superseded for unspecified days. For that reason, it has not been possible to even out democracy at this level. In relation to the municipal elections, the provisions in different states are not consistent. In some states, the state governments orchestrate elections, while in others, the municipal commissions make direct schedules. Therefore, it has been a long-term requirement to conduct elections to the urban local bodies under the auspices of self-regulating and unbiased bodies to make a certain a more democratic working, where all segments of the societal setup are represented. But in absence of such a body, the number in most cases rested with the state government. But the role of state government in this context was never too satisfactory either. Defining the role of state in this connection, the taxation inquiry comes in observed. It is responsibility of the state to see that local bodies are efficiently organized, that they perform their functions properly, and they take adequate part in the development of the country. Government control and help should, however, be not so meticulous or minute as to destroy the autonomy or self-reliance of local bodies. After independence, the local self-government in rural areas received a great deal of importance, and since the first 5-year plan, it has got tremendous momentum. But it was not in case of urban local administration. The unchanged arrangement of urban local government was persistent as it was during the pre-independence period. There was no structural transformation whatsoever. While on the other hand, urban clusters were growing with gravity. There are two kinds of statutory provisions creating a municipal authority like the Bombay Municipal Corporation Act 1888 and the City of Nagpur Corporation Act 1948 and the Delhi Municipal Corporation Act 1857. Or it may authorize the state government concerned to establish municipal corporation or municipality, municipal authority, municipal council or municipal board, such as the Bombay Provisional Municipal Corporation Act 1949, Gujarat Municipal Act 1964. The scope of municipality's power as well as the government control of municipality and municipal council depends on the law enforced by the establishment. This is due to two arguments. Firstly, the Constitution of India does not differentiate the powers and the responsibilities of the municipal authorities, and secondly, in the absence of any clear but deviation of powers and responsibilities are unacceptable, and the state governments manage and monitor municipal authorities. So, finally, to give the constitutional status to the urban local bodies, the Government of India has passed 74th Constitutional Amendment Act in July. Now we'll see what is that. The legislative bills of 73rd 24th Constitutional Amendment Act 1988 to the Constitution 64th Amendment, but which was initiated in the Parliament in July 1988 owing to the enterprising efforts of the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. It was the foremost endeavor to bestow constitutional status in urban local governments in India. Through the bill's broader objective is invigorating urban local government will respond favorably. Some of the niceties were disposed of, and the bill was eventually rooted in the Rajya Sabha. It was worth mentioning here that the key criticism erected against the bill was that It allowed the states little discretion in the pattern of local self-government reforms. Later, the 72nd Constitutional Amendment Bill for local bodies was introduced in Parliament, along with the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Bill for municipalities in September 1991 by the government of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. Both the bills were referred to the Joint Select Committee of the Parliament and they were timely passed as the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Bills in December 1992. And after the state assemblies of more than half the states ratified bills, the President of India gave his assent on April 20, 1993. The amendments were often enacted to the issuance of government notification. The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act 1992 Constitution went into effect on 1st June 1993. Now we'll see what are the salient features of the 74th Amendment Act. The following are the salient features of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. It consists of the mandatory provisions and the voluntary provisions. Mandatory provisions, the division of corporation into wards, direct election of members from the electors, direct election of chairpersons of the municipality, provision for ward committees in municipalities having a population of 3 lakhs and more, reservation of seats for members to women belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, key planning also for women at percentage, reservation of seats of members to the women separately and the people belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes committed at a specified percentage, reservation of office at chairpersons to the people belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, reservation of office of chairpersons to the women belonging to the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and general, duration of municipality, additional disqualifications prescribed for elections, holding of elections to municipalities before the expiry of the term of office, appointing of judicial authority for deciding the questions of disqualification, constitution of district planning committees in all districts, constitution of metro planning committee if there is a metropolitan area in any state, and devolution of powers to the municipality. The discretionary powers consists of composition of municipalities, composition of ward committees, method of choosing the members of ward committees, manner of choosing the chairperson to the ward committees, deciding the powers and functions of the ward committees, constituting the powers and functions, constituting of the other committees in the municipalities, percentage of reservation of office of chairpersons to the people belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, percentage of reservation of office of chairpersons to women, rotation of reserved seats of members of municipalities in different wards of municipalities in different ordinary elections, rotation of reserved office of the chairpersons of the municipalities in different elections, prescribing functions and powers to the municipalities, what taxes, fees, tolls, and the fees, etc., to be levied by the municipality, what should be the accounting procedure, what are the powers to be prescribed in the financial administration of the municipality, who should be the auditor of the auditing for auditing the accounts of the municipality, deciding the nature, content, and extent of powers which the state legislature can delegate from the state to the municipality. Now, these are the few features of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now we'll see urban governance. What is its concept and meaning? Urban governance is derived from the concept of governance in relation to urban areas to be reflective of how the various constituents of the public service delivery are organized to increase the welfare of citizens. It can only be measured relatively and somewhat subjectively how effective the institutions are in terms of the principles of sustainability, decentralization, efficiency, equity, participation, transparency, accountability, civic management, and citizenship and security. It requires a periodic strengthening of these aspects of city management in order to ensure service delivery, which is considered achievable through strategies of enabling participation and capacity building. The urban or city governance definition and process are essentially those pertaining to governance in general, that is, Central to the concept of city governance is the notion that a multitude of factors are involved in the city governance process. However, initiatives towards better governance can come not only due to the pressures of and fragmented and fragmented responsibilities, which is making many cities realize now that only a collegiate effort can improve city and competitiveness. Thereby, cities can discover the virtuous circles. In this context, city governance is more concerned with a network of system of governance rather than government, which all sectors, public, private, and other social organizations and geographies, cities and regional nations interact in a decision-making process in order to produce an efficient and effectively managed city as well as promoting city at a global level. These perspective has important implications for city strategies, planners, business, and real estate players because once adopted, it involves all of them in a complex and network process of decision making that can shape the future of their city. In fact, the realization of this leading to emergence of new networks that create a platform for discussion and debate on how to make cities better governed and what resources are required to happen. Now we'll see what are the urban local bodies and municipal governance in India. What are the types of urban local bodies present in India? Uh, I'll take a short break and I'll come back within 2 minutes. Thank you.